I suppose you can see my slides at the moment, and if I have to introduce the project vision in one single relatively long sentence, is that the ambition of the project is a coordination support action, so it's more a networking and communication project than a specific research project. So what we need is to develop a network and a unified strategy that includes all the efforts done about digitally enhanced learning. This is what DEL stands for, of course, in DEL4ALL. At the European level to help develop a unified strategy for digitally enhanced learning and somehow leveraging the power of digital transformation that, as we know very well, doesn't affect only teaching, training, learning at all levels, but also the economy at large and the society as well. So in its vision, DEL4ALL has three main objectives. On the one hand, we are striving to create a solid knowledge base by gathering the experience, best practices, projects, and initiatives in the digital learning area, and helping systematize them into a schema that takes into account both the technological aspects, so digital enhanced by what technologies, but also, even more importantly, digitally enhanced what and for what purpose, so the pedagogical and proper learning context and techniques and objectives aspect. That's the first objective. It is more about exactly organizing the knowledge in this area. The second one is as I said, we are a coordination action. So we are about getting people together and creating communities. So this is the second important objective, that it is to develop an ecosystem that is both collaborative, but also sustainable, so that when this project ends, the project lasts 1.5 years. We started my fault, 2 years, and we started at the beginning of 2020, so we have still the end of the year to run, and we want that the resulting community and resources and knowledge base that we build will survive the project and be sustainable and can be passed on to other initiatives. Last but not least, we have to provide the Commission and the community in general with a strategic look and some forward agenda to look ahead what is next and what are the trends that are emerging in the area of digitally enhanced learning. So this schema tries to sum up what I said, and you can see, as I told you before, that there is the technological aspects that you can see here, and at the beginning we chose a few relevant emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, blockchain, and you can see that, of course, machine learning and artificial intelligence are among the core technologies of interest of our project. And then on the engagement side, we have to connect with different experts in the area of technology and learning, and the two things combined. And this has been organized through a series of initiatives like expert groups, we have an advisory board, and so on. And then the communication went on through interviews, surveys, roundtables, and workshops. And as you know all very well, this was particularly challenging in this last year and this year as well, because the possibility to organize in-person workshops are strongly reduced, to say the least. So here I am quickly making some comments on the three main objectives. Okay, the first one, as I said, is to create a solid knowledge base. And one asset that the project produced so far, but is still evolving because it will be released in different versions throughout our lifetime, is the so-called technology versus education matrix. So this is the software data implementation of the idea that I mentioned before, where we want to classify and characterize the relevant digitally enhanced learning projects or initiatives, both in terms of the technologies that are used and in terms of the pedagogical learning objectives and the context that they apply to. So we built this matrix that is now available as part of the project website, DEL4ALL.eu. You can see it at the bottom of the slides. And there is a so-called online aggregator that allows you to browse these various resources, one of which, very importantly, is this matrix that we already used to do some data analysis to organize and categorize the various initiatives, the various best practices and projects in digital enhanced learning according to these two axes. Second point is, of course, as we said, the sustainable and collaborative ecosystem. So we are engaged in several activities. We have this list of activities, projects, and best practice. Again, I invite you all to contribute and to find out how we are gathering this information, and to contact us, to let us know about your plans or about your already successful research or learning project that you want to make known through our channels and so on. And through this, into the website, you can browse the matrix itself, the activities, and also the engaged people that we have, our expert list, and the technological and learning dimensions that we identified so far. And also this is open, so we welcome your contribution. Last is the forward-looking agenda, and of course, in order to, there is this saying that the real prophet is not he who can see the future, but it is he who can see the present. So the best way to do strategy mapping is, of course, to talk and to engage people that are expert and they are doing their own investigation in various related areas. So that's what we are doing here. And this third objective is, let's say, a fitting conclusion to my presentation, because, of course, it is exactly through this, to this objective that workshops like today's belong, because this is a major avenue for us to engage expert people in research and practice of digitally enhanced learning, and to gather their insight, their ideas, their direction suggestion, and to advance the, let's say, the forecast part of our project. And with that, I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to hand over back to Alex.
Thanks, Giovanni. So greetings, all of you. We have around us colleagues, friends, and people who are working in some degree or format in the areas of AI, machine learning, and digital games. What these people all have in common is they're thinkers and they're leaders in their field. And what I'd like to do is ask people to introduce themselves very quickly. So I think probably the best thing to do, since we're all looking at screens right now, is if I just ask people by name to introduce yourselves. So, you know, who are you? And specifically, what's your particular relationship with either AI, machine learning, or digital games? So let me start with Vanessa. Vanessa, why don't you go first and tell us who you are, what you do?
Okay, so I'm a lecturer at the Department of Artificial Intelligence at the University of Malta. So my relationship with AI is obvious, and also with education, because my background is in education. And we do work quite in close collaboration with a number of people from the games area and games sector, such as Georgios. We've worked with Thomas before. So in the department, there's also Matthew, who's here present as well. So, and Alexei. And this is it, basically.
Okay. Iro, in Greece. Iro, you're muted.
Sorry about this. I'm Iro. My background is on education sciences as well. And I have been working on information communication technologies in education and game-based learning over the past quite a few years. I teach courses on educational technology and game-based learning at the University of Athens, Department of Preschool Education. And I'm also a postdoctoral researcher at the Institute of Digital Games, University of Malta. I work with Professor Yanakakis, mainly on the
frozen up.
Sorry. Am I back?
Okay, while Iro gets a connection back, why don't we go to Alex?
I think she's here, Alex. But
Yeah, it's working for us. Huh?
It is fine for me too.
I think Alex is having a problem.
Yes, I think as Alex, not Iro.
Yeah.
I think Iro, you can continue, and I try to see if Alex's computer will come back. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm working on the Come and Play project where we examine science learning for children through digital games, and the LearnML project where we develop a framework and a toolkit for AI and machine learning literacy for primary and secondary education students through digital games. So my focus is on digital games and how we can implement them for introducing children to AI and ML concepts. So yeah, that's a brief introduction for me.
Okay, just because of the gremlins are all hitting us today, okay? So I temporarily lost my connection as well. If necessary, I'll move to another link. Alexei, why don't you go next whilst we try and figure out how we're going to deal with this? Alexei.
Oh, hi everyone, and thank you for the invite. I'm Alexei Dingley. I'm an associate professor at the University of Malta, Faculty of ICT, Department of AI. I'm a colleague of Vanessa and Matthew, and I collaborate with Georgios as well from Digital Games. Personally, I use different technologies in my work. So, of course, AI, machine learning, but also virtual reality, augmented reality, and also gaming. And in fact, I teach game AI at undergraduate level. I'm also involved in a number of projects, various projects related to health, transport, manufacturing, and of course, education.
Thanks, Alexei. JJ.
Alex, thanks for this opportunity. My name is JJ Agat. I'm the CEO of a London-based AI firm called EBO. We principally help enterprise service customers better, but we principally work in the healthcare area, where we reintroduce patient agency within the continuum of communication between the hospital and the patient. I'm very driven by this idea, Alex, of democratizing AI, and that is removing the hype and instead making the benefits directly available to companies and enterprises of all size, whether they are large or small. I'm also involved in a number of AI ethics initiatives, particularly Humanity 2.0, which is an institute set up by the Vatican in Rome to understand how to operationalize AI principles.
Thanks, Jed. Martin, you next.
Hello, so I'm Martin Hlosta. I'm a research fellow from Knowledge Media Institute, Teacher Research Center of the Open University in the UK. I have a computer science background, and my relation to education and AI is that for the last couple of years, I lead a project that's called OU Analyze, which is focused around predictive learning analytics and predicting which students are at risk of not submitting their assignments at the Open University's courses. And my passion is especially around how can we build these systems so that they bring benefits to both the students and teachers, and particularly lately, whether these systems can close the attainment gaps that are very important actually in the UK, not only the UK.
Okay, Jasper, in Slovenia.
Yes, hello. Thank you also from myself for the invitation, for the kind invitation. With Alex, we know each other for, I think, the last several years. It's around 5 years, I suppose, at least. However, I'm not even a thinker. I'm no expert. I'm not even affiliated to studies on AI, machine learning, or anything about that. My profession is to be a public servant for the Slovenian government. I'm working for the Slovenian Commission for UNESCO, as it says in my logo behind myself. However, during the last couple of years, it's so to say for 3-4 years, I'm quite actively connected to the field of AI on international level, especially. And that's because Slovenia recently established, it's a few weeks ago only, the first global or international research center on artificial intelligence under the auspices of UNESCO. And this center itself, and if I have just listened to our colleagues that presented themselves kindly, and if we consider UNESCO's policies and objectives, then especially the center will, of course, work in the field of the usage of AI in the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals, and is, during the last months, already actively involved in contact with the European Commission and UNESCO itself in the field of artificial intelligence in education and of the ethics of artificial intelligence. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Gasper. Georgios, I think that just leaves you, yeah?
Thank you, Alex. Thanks for the invitation. It's great to be around familiar faces, people that we work with, Vanessa, Iro, Alexei, and Matthew to a degree. So I'm directing the Institute of Digital Games at the University of Malta. I've been working in a number of projects at the intersections of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and games. In particular, I'm interested in using AI for creating games, for designing games, for understanding players, for playing games, for testing games. And over the last many years, I've been transferring this use of AI in games in educational settings, health settings, applications in cultural heritage, and so on. So at the Institute, we run a number of AIDS 2020 projects that Iro talked about. In particular, related to this particular seminar, you already mentioned LearnML. The two of us work in that project, Vanessa too, trying to bring AI education to primary, secondary school through games. I also wear, beyond my university hat, I wear a hat, let's say entrepreneurship hat. So I run this AI company called Model AI, which uses AI to automatically test games in simulated worlds. So thanks for the invitation once more.
Okay, so that's a speakers lineup. Let's not just call them speakers. These are people who are, part of a community can also become part of the community of practice, like you all can, because DEL4ALL really has its door open to anybody who wants to get involved. This project is going to run for another year, and I would encourage you to join in whatever means possible. We forgot to tell you that we are recording the session, so please, if there's anybody who doesn't want to get recorded, that's the time to jump out. Just as a brief scene setting on my side, the first thing is the focus of this session is really on learners, and by learners I don't necessarily mean kids. I mean anybody who's interested in a lifelong learning journey. It could be my dad, as far as I'm concerned, okay? And I think that is something that we need to bear in mind. Clearly, there's a symbiotic relationship with institutions that deliver learning. But again, not all of these institutions are necessarily higher education institutions. And that was specifically my reason why I invited Jejea, for instance, coming in from the private sector, to contribute to this discussion. I think there are three things, maybe overall things we should consider at the back of our minds when it comes to learning. And I think maybe we should consider learning with AI, machine learning, and digital games. So it could be, new approaches to learning and gamification, for instance. I think there's also learning about these topics, okay? Learning about AI and machine learning and digital games. And that implies research, I guess, and also inevitably we're going to be getting into the issue of ethics at some stage. I think the other one is also preparing for these technologies, whether that means the administration involved in getting engaged with these technologies or not. Okay, so the focus really is on the changes, perhaps, on the way we learn. Okay, so I want to start with a generic question, which is, what are these technologies good for? So I'm taking a very utilitarian model here. And what are they good for? What are they good for in terms of education? So, are AI, machine learning, and digital games obvious bedfellows for those of you who are in education? Yes or no? So do I have any volunteers, or I can pick someone to deal with this one? Georgios, why don't I pick on you first, okay?
Just because I was last, okay.
Because you were last, and because you were smiling, and that indicated that, yeah. So let's dive in.
I have opinions like everyone, okay. Sure. I mean, there must be a reason why we're holding this seminar here today. AI and machine learning can help, I mean, technology-wise, can help personalize education, can assist in the very fact that we can detect various needs, skill sets of students, learners across all educational levels, and we can help them when, to a good degree, assist them when teachers are not there in non-formal educational settings, let's say. And games are a wonderful vehicle for education in general, not necessarily about artificial intelligence or machine learning, but because there are these wonderful fantasy worlds that we can, and are immersive, so children especially, not only children, actually nowadays everyone plays games. So, and they're with us for the last 30 or 40 years. Most of us are actually playing games. So it's a natural mean of interaction, natural mean of learning. And they integrate this interesting triangle, as I call it, of, you know, emotion, learning, and interaction. So basically we learn through games because we get into wonderful experiences. So they are facilitators of learning, and that, you know, we basically play games since our birth. So it's another way of learning, and that's why it has been so powerful throughout all the projects that we run at the Institute, for instance, for teaching AI or anything else. So yeah, great fantasy worlds and great technology that we can put together to enable more personalized education, more enhanced education, and empower teachers at the same time. That's my take.
Okay, let me dive into the AI people. Okay, first, starting with, you know, I guess Vanessa and Alexei, why don't you follow each other, you know, quickly on, you know, what are these things good for?
In fact, I wanted to pick up on one issue that he said. He said about, you know, you could have something about learning about AI. In fact, one of the reasons why recently we published at the department, we published a book, which is AI in Education. And it's about teaching about concepts of AI. And the reason why we thought these were important, because they do stimulate some higher order thinking skills, such as, for example, problem solving, the idea of using creativity to reach certain conclusions or certain solutions to certain problems. So, and as we know, we are living in this era where AI is, you know, emerging more and more, not just as a technology, but also integrating itself into our lives. So it's not just about knowing what AI is, but getting into the frame of mind of thinking about AI is going to help people, you know, move away from the standardized, convergent way that education is being done and move towards a more divergent way of thinking.
So new approaches to education. Alexei, I mean, do you want to pick up on that?
Yes, and I wanted to pick up on something which Georgios said before as well. Now, my take on education is that, you know, I believe there was a time where we decided that everybody should be educated, no? And the model which we found was, I like to call it the industrial revolution education, where you put people in a class and everybody has to learn the same things. Now, thank God, I mean, we're moving away from that. And that is where, you know, what Vanessa just said is important, because we can offer a personalized education. And I think the nicest thing with AI is that each and every child can have his own educational path. So, you know, it can be carved specifically for that particular child. And this is important because not everyone learns the same, not everyone needs the same amount of work, the same gets excited with the same stuff. So it's very important to personalize that part. And I believe, and also from experiments which I've seen, when you give children this customized education, they tend to internalize much more, they tend to learn much more. But I wanted to add as well the fact, pointing on the issue of games, that it seems to me that at one point, I don't know exactly when this happened, but we removed the fun element from education. and education became that boring part of life where children have to sit down for a number of hours and they have to somehow get all that information in their brain. And I think that is the biggest contribution, in my opinion, which games can give to education, because they can make it fun, they can make it exciting. I mean, when I play with my children, we play, I don't know, strategy war games. So we relive famous battles. I mean, how exciting is that? You're not just reading in a book about that battle, but you're actually playing that battle in real time. So I think that is the fun we should give back to children, especially in education. And my take is that, Georgios mentioned it. I mean, games are the first form of learning which each and every one of us met in their life, no? So why are we putting it aside rather than building on it, capitalizing on it, and use it to teach even better concepts for our children?
Is there anyone who disagrees with this? Because I can tell you what my issue with this is, which is, I mean, Ken Robinson died last year, the year before? I mean, we've been talking about learning needing to be fun for many years, right? And yet most education institutions have one-size-fits-all systems. And if I'm listening to Alexei properly, and Georgios, okay, we're talking about personalized learning and fun. Does anybody want to come in and contribute?
Perhaps I'll put in a word on that, Alex. Thank you. I think this is coming from a very deep conflation of principles which we see in society today. Men and machines are good at fundamentally different things, right? So people have intentionality. We form plans. We have free will. We make decisions, especially in complicated situations. But we are less good at making sense of enormous piles of data. In an opposite fashion, computers are as polarly opposite to humans as possible. They excel, right, at efficient data processing, and they can create real-time virtual environments, personalized pathways, game situations, but then they struggle to make basic judgments that would be simple for most of us humans. I think this is, at least academically, an understood distinction, but it is probably the conflation of these two capabilities which often confuse decision makers in society of how to adapt technology to an educational environment. And once we've understood the key differences between the potential that both agents could bring into the education environment, our ability to structure curricula and strategy becomes much easier.
I want to bring in Gaspar in a way from the national basis. Gaspar was very humble at the beginning, okay, when he said, I'm not an expert on anything, okay? Gaspar is one of these movers and shakers in his country, okay, in terms of let's get things done on a national level. And we're now going from, the potential, the fun, and enormous piles of data, which is what Jeje was talking about. I mean, why is your country suddenly keen on doing something with AI, or is it not suddenly keen on doing something with AI, Gaspar? Before I tunnel back into some of the other.
Thanks, Alex. But probably you're right that we are trying to work and to develop, especially on national level. But however, my perspective, my personal perspective, is totally international or global. But following your question, as you remember, we came together because of the topic of the so-called development of the UNESCO recommendation on open educational resources. That was, to all of you, just a short and brief information. Slovenia was hosting the Second World Congress on this open educational resources, which goes into the direction of digitalization and of course also about the usage of artificial intelligence in technologies for educational purposes. So this is probably why, and when you are asking me why Slovenia, or is Slovenia trying or working or actively engaging itself in the field of artificial intelligence, yes, indeed, I do not want to make a big promotion about our country. We are as small, probably not as small as Malta, but however, we are considered as a very small country within the center of Europe with 2 million inhabitants. But the research in the field of artificial intelligence started and used to start already in the beginning of the 70s of the last century. And that's probably why in the statistics of the OECD, Slovenia comes up at a very high ranked level when it's considering, when you are considering the per capita researchers on AI. So here are from 2 million inhabitants and there are around, I don't know, 1,000 or 1,200 researchers, which is a lot for such a small country, who are working in the field of AI. And this has been probably recognized by an international organization like UNESCO, but not only UNESCO itself, and why Slovenia has been asked to establish an international research center on AI. And that's what you are asking me for. However, in the end, I would like to say this research center, which I'm very happy that it was inaugurated just a few weeks ago. Some probably of you, yourself at least, I hope, have taken part in this online launch event, which gathered 1,200 or 1,100 people from all over the world and from 123 countries in the world. And so you can imagine that we are planning and having a view which is going absolutely into global direction and not only on national level. So probably I can, after that, when you're going back now to the other colleagues, I can jump in probably with some more reflections also on this specific national point of view in regards to the field of education and to students in general. Thanks.
I think what's interesting is this idea of that clusters of researchers, okay, and you need clusters of researchers, I guess, to make something happen with AI. I want to try and dig a bit deeper into the whole thing, okay, in terms of, because we are here talking about, AI, machine learning, and digital games in education. I'm going to turn to Martin before I turn to Eero, okay? I mean, in terms of, how can we get these things embedded in education? How do we get these things to become mainstream in the education? If it's not the system, the education institutions, I guess. You're at Open University, so how come you're doing what you're doing there?
Yeah, I think I would like to follow on what the judge said, because I really like this distinction, and people make it clear, like where people excel and where machine excel. And it's very important that all the actors at the institution understand this, because at the beginning, there is always this fear of AI is taking our jobs, which doesn't really help in promoting the good parts of the AI. On the other hand, sometimes people that they have their own biases think that they know everything and they can totally control what's going on. So if I give an example, when a teacher is responsible for an online course, this teacher might tell you, yeah, I know exactly all my students what's going on, but the fact is that very likely the teacher is not sitting with their students in the room. So very often you will have a student that possibly needs the attention of a teacher, but the teacher might not spot the problem of the student. It might be because the teacher is not aware of this. It might be because the student is shy to ask. So when going back to the how can we promote this? We struggled at the beginning in our project when we tried to say, okay, this is the AI, this is something that will help you. But we really had to break this barrier of people being a bit afraid and to really understand them, where is it helping them, and to prove them, like to almost get this aha moment. So for example,
fear. So you talk about fear of technology as well, and yet and I think maybe that's where I'm kind of distincting between, there's a distinction between them maybe. Eero, there is no fear of games, is there? Some people might say they're flippant, they're not important, but there isn't a fear factor associated with games in the same way there might be about this obscure thing, Martin, called machine learning, I guess, right? And when it comes to AI, then we'll dig a bit more. So, Eero, what do you think about it? Was it easier when Jorgis, was there and taking over a digital games institute on the small island of Malta? Is it easier because of games?
Yeah, exactly. I agree with you, Alex. There is no fear about games. Children are very familiar with games. They use games a lot. So I think we all think it's an excellent vehicle, an excellent tool for introducing artificial intelligence concepts to children. On the other hand, children have access to AI systems and AI applications in their everyday lives without even knowing about it when they use Google or YouTube or social media, any social medium. So they use this type of technology without knowing it and without knowing the implications of using it. So games are great tools for familiarizing them with how AI applications work. And also they can be great platforms for thinking critically about the role of AI. Even if it concerns AI integrated in games or AI applications in their everyday lives. So yeah, and that's what we actually do in the LearnML project that Jorgos mentioned. We're trying to develop games that show the children how AI applications work and how our biases and our preconceptions can influence the architecture of an AI system. So we give them a glimpse like what's going on behind the scenes, under the hood of AI applications.
I want to pick up on...
Alex, can I interrupt?
Sure. Interrupt.
Just to build up on this question that you said, is there any fear of games? And there may not be any fear of games. I think, yes, there may not be fear of games. But when it comes to the education and the education system, we do not take games seriously. We think games, can have no serious applications, serious as in not serious games as such, but they don't go beyond. In fact, I do believe that games can have the potential to change users' behavior, okay, people's behavior. You can change people's behavior, and I think that's one form of learning that we should aspire to, that a person can change his or her behavior through playing games. And this is where, the seriousness of it comes along. What happens in the classroom when we see games being used in the classroom is that sometimes people use games just, maybe to break the ice, which is not bad in itself, but games can have the potential to be much more than that. And they can be used, even those same games can be used to somehow provoke thoughts and discussions that can lead so much more to it than the actual playing of the game itself. So this is something important which somehow fails to make its way to people, especially in the education sector, and from what we see in how they are applied in a classroom. I mean, we used to sometimes see people playing games in the classroom just because, students finish their work and they have like 10 minutes, to spare. And what do? Oh, let people play games. And just like that, without harnessing that huge potential that every game can carry. I mean, potentially every game does carry a huge potential of learning, of changing somebody's behavior. And I think this is what we miss.
I want to try and bridge.
Can I add something?
Yes, okay, go.
Okay. So I beg to differ a little bit with Vanessa, but a lot with Eero on the fact that people are not afraid of games. I think a lot of people are afraid of games, to be honest. And I'll relate a personal experience that I'm also part of a school board of my children. And luckily we have people at school who decided to organize an esports tournament, but it wasn't, just playing games. It was also about safe playing and what you should do and all the pitfalls, etc., etc. But you can't imagine the amount of feedback we got from some parents, which was a very small set of parents that were sort of like demonizing these games, and sort of they going to the extremes that, why should a school organize such events? I mean, it was something incredible. I never thought that there would be this adversity towards games. So there is a group. It's not a big group, I must admit, but there is a group who are very much against games, especially when it comes to their children playing games, because they do not see the value of game playing. When it comes to AI, I think that people still do not understand the implications of AI. Like I was part of the national AI strategy, and it was very clear that people heard about the word AI, but they have no idea what it is or if they're using it. And in fact, when we gave them examples, everybody was using some sort of AI in their life. So I think at this stage, the fear of AI is pretty much the same fear which AI poses in Hollywood movies. No, the Terminator, they're coming to kill us all, they're coming to take their jobs, but they're not understanding the real implications of it. And just one thing to add to what Vanessa said as well about changing people's behavior. In fact, we had a project, me and Vanessa, on autism, and over there it was very clear that we created this serious game, A Day in the Life of an Autistic Child, and we did a survey pre and post the experience, and there were actual changes about how people felt about autism. So the empathy level really went up after just using the experience.
I think it's really interesting, actually, because I'm trying to tunnel between something that Eero said, which is we're using these technologies without knowing, and what you're saying, Alexei, about fear of almost like the unknown. And I was promising myself I wouldn't talk about education institutions, but we all know that education institutions are traditionally very averse to change. Okay, and I'm just wondering what needs to be done to, in a way, acknowledge what the reality is, what's going on out there. One of the challenges that we've had with DEL4ALL, in fact, has been this, okay, that we're looking at, the impact of these emerging technologies on the future of education, when it's quite clear that the education system itself is being severely disrupted as we speak now because of COVID. Here we all are looking at ourselves, looking at screens. We didn't used to do this, okay? In the same way that Alexei is saying, somebody introduces a game, even in a small education setting, and people don't think that is real education, that it should be something else. So I'm just wondering, I'm going to point at Jeje here, okay? Jeje is also a parent, okay? Besides being somebody who's working in AI, I mean, how do you feel listening to all of this, because you dived into AI a couple of years ago, remember? And I was thinking, what's Jeje doing? He's already built one company. Was he going into this? So were you too early? Is it too late? Or were you working for tomorrow? How does this work?
And this is really a discussion about adoption, isn't it? It's in truth, Alex, the conundrum lies here. We think that digital or AI is about technology, but in truth, digital is all about change and innovation. And this is why we have these sensibilities that Alexei mentioned earlier around change reluctance. I think the common obstacle that we constantly encounter in the public sector or in the private sector around adoption or innovation in general is this absence of change momentum, this degree of inertia. And I blame it most commonly on the evidence I see, which is that both academia, public sector, and private companies often restrict the function of innovation to just one functional group within that entity. So if it's a company, typically innovation is the responsibility of the ICT department. If it's academia, it's typically the function of the digital transformation or transformation team. And this is an entire myth Alex, this is exactly this myth that one group is more suited to push innovation than any other group within that unit. And this is exactly the hindrance to innovation and adoption of AI or other technologies. I think we need to develop, and academia could be a good place where to start, this cross-functional team that works seamlessly across the different areas of knowledge and capability to usher in innovation. And unless we size up this opportunity as being a cross-functional one, then we'll never be able to drive the true benefits that AI and innovation could bring.
I mean, you can tell from my nodding, I agree. I'm going to cue in Giovanni, okay, Julie, because Giovanni, I think wanted to ask a specific question or make
Yes, thanks, Alex. Well, I wanted to ask something about this idea of the fear, right? Because this is basically a barrier to adoption, so it's something that we should address and see how to remove it. And while I agree that most people don't get the implication of AI, is also true that if we create a discipline and call it artificial killing machine, then it's not strange that people are scared. So artificial intelligence at its core was born to do the Frankenstein thing a little bit. And even if the Frankenstein thing is a bad idea, unfortunately, a lot of people still think it's a good idea. So it is also true, and the same for the education. It's not so strange that people or teachers fear that with AI, they will get less control on how they can help students to learn and so on. So do you have some suggestion of how the idea of using more artificial intelligence techniques in education can be explained from a process and relationship context between the people that use it, so the students and the teachers, and even I guess the families of the students. So this would be my question on the what measures you would suggest to help with this fear of AI.
Any takers on that one?
If I may, I think the right approach is to show the benefits of the educator. Why am I saying that? Because most of the time we focus on the learner, on the child, but when it comes to the actual implementation, we need the educator. And most of the time we forget about the educator. Sort of, we've seen a lot of reforms in education in the past, and what normally happens is they just dump reforms on the educators and they have to do them, which I believe that's the wrong approach of doing that. So like in one of my projects, what I'm doing is that I'm trying to come up with ways in which I can help the educators. So for example, if you take personalized education, which we mentioned earlier, so the educator now doesn't need to create the worksheets for the students because it's the AI that's doing it. The educator doesn't need to do the corrections because it's the AI that's doing it. So, there's a value for the educator even before the value for the learner. And like that, what we're doing is that we're freeing them time, precious time, which they should use either to better themselves or their offering, or to focus on those children that actually need the help of the teacher. So I think when we design these sort of solutions, they should be a win-win-win situation for everyone. If we're not doing that, if we break the balance, this is good for the student, but it's a lot of work for the educator, it will never happen. So we need to strike this very delicate balance between all the stakeholders. At least that's what I think.
Okay, so if something is good for learners, it also has to be good for those who are in the business of delivering learning. Otherwise, it's not going to work. I can see that Thomas has his hand raised. Thomas, so if you want to
yes,
dive in now.
Thank you. I would actually like to chime in what Alexi and Vanessa said before, that I think games can be a good way to go, but when using games in schools, we are not there yet. We are talking about a use that Vanessa described, like using games because there's time left. But if you go for for games that actually also use AI, then there's actually a great potential for bringing an understanding of AI to a classroom. And if you have a look at a game like Minecraft, for example, there is AI at hand, and there is a player tinkering with AI. And for me, I started a company 6 years ago about bringing games to education. For me, games haven't really entered school yet. The fact that we are talking about serious games still is a very good indicator of the fact that we are not really bringing games and their potential to the classroom, because complex games that are not considered serious games offer ample opportunity to get to know AI and get to know the limitations of AI. Because if we're talking about evil machines and have a look at games culture, you can see that AI actually is not that intelligent yet.
Can I ask my colleagues from the Institute of Digital Games if they agree with that or not? That, you know, I mean, you guys are at the cutting edge when it comes to research, okay? And yet these things aren't entering the hallowed, you know, bricks and mortar education institutions.
Well, I mean, so many things to talk about here. Yeah, we are talking about cutting edge technologies in AI and also games. So we have been talking about the fear of games. Yes, people still fear about games. I agree with Alexei and Vanessa. It's an immature medium, or let's say young medium of 30-40 years, digital games particularly. So people are still have images of violence in games, like, you know, the first person shooters, for instance, or even, you know, Pac-Man. For some of us, Pac-Man is a violent game. You eat things, right? So games have violence, but at the same time, you know, we shouldn't be afraid of games. There are plenty of studies supporting that. We as educators need to educate further the teachers, early adopters like children, that they can train their teachers. In my experience, holding this AI company, we educate game designers and level designers to adopt AI for their products because they are afraid of AI. It's going to take their jobs. And we're just trying to convince them that it is the future, it happens now, and their jobs is going to be so much better, so much more efficient. And it happens now simply because the whole game industry is changing. So the education of game professionals, game designers should also change towards a more technology-oriented education. So we're talking about education at all levels. We need to train people from primary school years all the way to lifelong learning procedures about the benefits of AI, about the threats of AI, but at the same time we need to inform them that AI is a statistical process at the end of the day. It's not a Terminator, right, or Skynet. At the same time, games have great benefits. We need to talk about all this. So it's all about education, I think, at all levels of the society, because some of us have been born with games, with digital games. Some of us are older than that, so sort of like a bit afraid of the technology. The same applies for AI. People don't really know, the majority of people don't really know what AI is about. And of course, it takes time to adopt technology. It happened with films back in the day. It happened with photography, right? So we just need to give time to people to adopt games and AI. It's just that we need to train them about their benefits.
Vanessa, before I cue you in, the first thing is that, I mean, Gasper has already had to go for another meeting. With your permission, I'd like to go.
I'm sorry. Sorry.
I can see that you're about to leave, Gasper, aren't you?
Please consider the chat. There is a web link for all of you, which could be interesting. Thank you.
Thanks, Gasper. So I don't know if you can see the chat over there. Gasper's left the link over there. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So with your permission, I'd like to go on for just a bit longer. And I'm not surprised in a way, because you can see some of these, I wouldn't say tensions. In a way, there's Alexei saying we're already using AI or rather the institutions already using AI to operate more efficiently. I'm thinking of Martin, okay, who from machine learning, right? And Martin, I mean, you're doing machine learning for analytics and things like that. What are you doing at Open University?
Yeah, that's correct. Like using the machine learning to combine different data sources, particularly background of students, their previous studies, and then what they are actually doing, how they are learning, in order to identify risk of not submitting their assignments.
And yet, okay, so this is what's really interesting in a way. So you've got the institution itself knows it has to do something, it is doing something. And I'm using the word institution very liberally, by the way, okay? But people in the know, the academics, the researchers, are aware that these new technologies are happening. We're using them in our everyday lives, and they're starting to implement them for the benefit of, hopefully, the learner as well, okay? And yet at the same time, JJ had talked about this word, okay, enormous, you know, piles of data, I think, okay. And this brings me to we can't avoid the whole issue about ethics around anything to do with AI, okay. I'll give you a simple example. I'm running in a parallel universe at the moment. I'm running a whole series of webinars about the use of AI in education, and the mix that we've got there are people in Asia and people in Europe. And the way, you know, for example, that academics in China were looking at AI, okay, and anything else related to it was like, what's the problem? This is a you know, very powerful technology. And of course, this is being used for the benefits of society. And on the other side, a lot of people who are in Europe were kind of squirming and saying, you know, we quite haven't got there yet. And I'm just wondering, on the basis that none of us are going to get any younger, and Yorgos said, these things take time. What kind of timeline are we looking at? Because I keep on looking at our DEL4ALL project here, okay? And we have the commission that is basically saying, you know, you guys are running for another year. And we know there's been a huge crisis which has hit education. People like me keep on telling them it's not going to go back to the way it used to be. Is the crisis an organic crisis, an opportunity for us now to finally get decision makers, policy makers, whether to the same, you know, table or what? Okay, so this is, you know, sets from an element of frustration, I think, from my part. Okay, both with my academic hat on or my institutional hat on, which is frustrated, and on the other, you know, more commercial side of things, where we're using AI all the time, every single time, you know, we're speaking to our phone sometimes. No? So what do we think about this thing about too early, too late, too difficult, too challenging, too regulatory? The EU will help us through regulation. Silicon Valley, we have to avoid the Silicon Valley debacle with social media, and we have to do things differently. Does anybody have any views on that?
Perhaps I'll just put in a line there, Alex. I think the race isn't only one relating to time for adoption. I think the race also is for us to create a sustainable ethical framework in which there is a broad consensus about. I listened with interest to Martin's project at Open University relating to the predicted probability in which one may or may not actually submit a dissertation in time. And we see other models which are being used to determine kids who would be predictively at risk at falling behind in certain areas of studies, and so giving them more attention. Typically, the way we looked at this for many, many years, the AI ethics of this was extremely utilitarian. So we would look at the intended consequences, which typically would mean that the kids would do better. And as a result, we would decide, okay, since the consequences are on the sum of it all better, then let's proceed and intervene in the human life of that particular child. But one might question whether this is the right approach today, now that we know a little bit more and now that we have more mature systems. Firstly, there are a number of problems. Problems in the model itself, so in the algorithmic capability, a problem also in the bias behind that. And of course, we know the truth, especially in education, of having false positives, so people being labeled at risk and being intervened on when that was not necessary, and also the flip side of that, kids who are being missed from the at-risk list. I think this is a real ethical problem that we need to accept, and we need to develop a framework. And in my view, the timeline, the speed which you discussed, Alex, is more one for an agreement on the ethical standard than that towards technology adoption. Technology is just a vector of change. It's not the real issue here. I don't think there is an easy answer to this ethical problem, but I will pose perhaps where I stand on the matter. My view is that we need to move away from utilitarian ethics in AI adoption and move more towards the concept of virtue ethics. Now, virtue ethics is this idea of reviewing an action based on moral excellence, based on human flourishing. This is something Aquinas wrote a lot about, and Aristotle too, and the concept of eudaimonia. So what we're thinking about here is this idea that we should allow and embrace technology if it helps fulfill human flourishing in the spiritual, societal, and individual sense. My view is we need a fuller framework to evaluate AI in education and generally to evaluate AI in society. And we don't have that yet.
We've got about another 4 minutes, I would give it, okay, to run. So I would really like to open the floor to all the speakers if they want to make any concluding remarks. I see this discussion as just starting. And I think even within the project, within DEL4ALL, I think we're going to keep on dovetailing back into this idea of, I think, education as a public good, which is the one thing that people all agree about. We have very different views of what is good education. And I think there are very different views on the ethics side of things, I repeat. And I think a lot of the fear is also in terms of what's happened with the use of our personal data and the Silicon Valley debacle, I would call it, okay? And is there anything that we can learn from there when it comes to AI and machine learning in particular? Even if games, yes, fear of games, I would put it at a slightly lower level, but I think there is a distinct fear of these new technologies. And yet we all know that change is happening all around us. And I keep on thinking that the best way of driving change sometimes is to have highly visible pilots or sandboxes, or just saying, here, look at something which was done here in this particular context. We'll showcase it. And that's the way you can get over some of those barriers. It's certainly what we had done, for instance, with blockchain and credentials in this country, and then that was used as a model in other countries. I'm just wondering if any of this resonates. And I think we've got in a couple of minutes it's a free-for-all. Does anybody want to make any comments? That includes anybody who's listening as well. And if not, we'll wind up. Giovanni, why don't you go for it?
If no one has another question, I had a question on AI, but I also had one on games. And on games, what I wanted to ask is about, first of all, what is the difference between an interactive experience and a game? And if there is something about the reward system, so game is that I get rewarded and I can win or lose in a way, then in my experience as a user of video games, I can say that mostly the reward is either immediate, so continuous gratification to make me play, which is okay, or there is a story-based reward when I get rewarded at the end of the experience. But learning, or at least the way it's set up in education, is a reward that comes much later, right? So are there some thoughts about how to, from a game designer point of view, how to do games that allow you, that make the player delay their reward years after they finish playing the game? Because this, I think, it's a very unusual concept. I think it's a good idea, but I haven't seen it much in games.
So to get away from the quick fix, you're saying?
Yes, and even on the finish the game, because finish the game is like getting the degree and think that you won because you got the degree. But that's when you start. And if you're lucky, you will win much later, right? And this, I don't know how how it maps with games. I think it would be important to embed that in games, to make games useful for education. And I don't know if
all right. I mean, the obvious target for this question are Iro and Georgios. I think it's a complicated one, I think, but I'd love to hear an answer if you have one. And I think Thomas is also suggesting he has an answer. So who wants to go first? Thomas, if you had the other.
Yes, sure. Rewards years later on, I think this is just developing. There are companies that are actually promoting that they would rather hire a World of Warcraft clan leader than a university degree person. And if you look at the topic of esports, and if you think in terms of participatory culture and a prosumer model and affinity spaces, then probably being part of that culture is the reward that is going to come in years later. We are actually working on a project at the moment that is creating places for esports culture, and there young people do esports and do live streaming, and the digital skills they acquire there are probably they are going to be rewarded with finding well-paid and good job. This is not guaranteed, but this is actually what working with an elaborate games culture is aiming at, and I think there are definite rewards when it comes to technology and professional skills in the future.
Iro, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I wanted to touch upon something Thomas said, the participatory culture aspect. And I wanted just to mention a couple of interesting aspects relevant to this as well. The inclusion of the community of learners, of the students, of the children, of the teachers, when designing a game, for example, or another AI application for education. So it's important to go to them during the initial stages of the design phases, or even before that, when we have the discussions about what AI systems to develop, so as to make sure that the systems we develop address specific needs and goals in education. And also another interesting activity, let's say, relevant to the participatory culture, is the engagement of children in the design of games. So, I mean, we have game jams where students, children, even educators design and develop their own games. So this is another interesting aspect, which trains a lot of skills, creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, communication. So this is another huge topic as well.
I just want to pick up on this one, and it goes beyond the games. The Utopian model, I mean, we never ask learners what kind of education should be served to them, do we? We always assume we know best because we're the elders dishing them out. You might have a PhD or whatever it is, and you think that's what's good for them, isn't it? And I think these technologies, whether they're new or whatever it is, can enable the end user, the learner, to become a bit more empowered, I think. And I think we could use the excuse maybe of games. Remember, I mean, all our kids have been using games from the moment they were born, okay? The so-called digital natives, not people my age. And I think that's one way of bridging what it's potentially this gap, I think, let alone the other minefield of ethics, big data, who owns the data, cultural issues, Big Brother, surveillance capitalism, so from one side, you've almost got the Henry Jenkins participatory culture, and you've got Shoshana Zuboff on the other side saying people are watching over you. And we seem to be at this stage. My feeling is that we are going to revisit this territory again as we're coming to the later stage of DEL4ALL. I think one of the Commission's comments were that we had started by literally diving into blockchain, And now as we look at some of these other technologies, I think we need to bring this together, I think, towards the tail end of a project which will run for another year. I don't know about you. I mean, I found this discussion very interesting, and I would really encourage whoever gets to look at this recording as well to connect with us. And I think we will go back to some of these discussions. I think we've only just started now. I think we only just started hinting on some of these deeper things, and maybe we can do a deeper dive later on. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm very pleased with the way this discussion went. Giovanni, I don't know if you've got any last words, or we can, with 15 minutes.
I'm very happy. I learned a lot, and it's a very stimulating discussion. I would like to talk more, ask more things. So by all means, you're right. We have to keep it up. And also, I guess, internally in the project, NextGA, we can decide what to do with the initial output of this. If we want to write a report or maybe a list of questions or something like that we can use to further discussion. So, and I think this is very in line with the project objectives and also with the feedbacks that we got halfway through by the reviewers and the commission. So this is, I think, a very good step, but definitely not the end point. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for bearing with us. Thank you for our people in Greece specifically, to drag you out on a holiday. Okay, so thanks very much. I mean, I learned a lot as well. Okay, so we'll be reaching out to all of you as well. Thank you. Okay, have a good Friday. Have a good weekend, all of you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Alex. Thank you.